Know what to eat, but find yourself not eating it. Perhaps you've been on diets and off again and just wonder why you can't stick to them. The Eating For You podcast, hosted by me, Sallyanne, will show you what's been missing so you can enjoy a healthier way of eating that lasts. Hi, Sallyanne here today, and I'm really excited to be sharing World Pulses Day with Candace. Welcome, Candace.
Thanks. It's really wonderful to be here.
Now, before we get going, as I usually do, I want to read Candace's bio. So you've got an understanding of Candace's background and her passion for all things nutrition, and we'll learn a little bit more about how she puts nutrition into practice with her clients as well. Candace is an integrative nutrition health coach, fermentation expert, and founder of Wild Health Hub, which I'm hoping we'll hear a little bit more about today. With over 30 years of experience in holistic living, culinary nutrition, and gut health, she is passionate about empowering people to nourish their bodies through sustainable and traditional food practices. And it's a great topic, Pulses, talking about traditions as well, which I know we're going to tap in today. Candace specialises in making health and wellness accessible by blending ancient wisdom with modern living, helping individuals achieve vibrant health through practical everyday choices. So, Candace, tell me, how did you actually get interested in health, well-being, culinary nutrition? How did that all start for you?
Well, it's a very easy story to say because I basically grew up in it. I grew up in Canada, and my mom owned a health food store, was as a holistic nutrition practitioner, herbalist, and had a clinic. So we basically just lived that lifestyle. It was a really important time in the 70s when we were transitioning to a lot more. It was like when convenience foods are all starting to come in. Mothers are going back to working full time, things like that. And so putting that nutrient dense food on the table is really important. So it basically was a foundation in that there. And then I moved to Australia to do a naturopathy degree. And here we are. So yeah, it was just, very easy. And you mentioned culinary nutrition, and lots of times people don't know what culinary nutrition is. And it's, we talk about eating healthy or cooking healthy food, which it is, but what it really does is it looks at how you prepare your food to get the most nutrients out of it, because we can have really good food and not prepare it well, or we can have less nutrient dense food and prepare it well and get the same results. Well, you get better results with nutrient dense food in the first place, but you know what I mean. It comes down to preparing it and making sure that you're getting your best bang for your buck and making it taste delicious so that healthy eating isn't a chore.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and that's what sort of hit me with that term culinary nutrition, because I often think about medicinal herbs and culinary herbs and think about those flavors that, the culinary herbs, which I think we could actually say medicinal herbs these days too, when we get into the science of their nutritional and phytonutrient properties. And I think we might have to do another episode on that. So already I'm thinking about what else we can talk about. But yeah, no, thanks for explaining that, because culinary nutrition might be a term that our listeners are not familiar with. So that's really great. So tell me, do pulses and legumes appear on your plate at home? Are they something that you use at home?
Yeah. Absolutely. So we do, I love chickpeas. So chickpeas are something that go in everything and do everything. Chickpeas, add them to salad, add them to everything. But, adding lentils to soups or to curries, even to things like a bolognese sauce. So even if you're not eating vegetarian, there's ways to add a lot more plant-based fiber into your food. So what I've done to transition some of my other family members into eating more plant-based is slowly start them by adding these things into their meals. So they kind of get hidden in a lot of places. But, I probably do a fermented hummus every week, and you wouldn't know that it was a fermented hummus. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure, but that's something that I make every week, and we just have it, and it's an easy snack, and it's an easy way to get it into your diet. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great because I do the same with my clients because legumes and pulses are kind of that forgotten food group, if you like. And I know in the most recent Australian dietary guidelines and nutrition guidelines, they were added in as a protein substitute. And sometimes people think, oh, that's just what vegetarians eat, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. You don't have to be vegetarian to actually enjoy these foods. And I know we're going to be talking about the nutritional benefits, and I think we'll be able to sell them on that basis alone. But also the simplicity of cooking. You know, it does take a little bit of a mindset shift. I know the most recent time I became vegetarian again and decided, yes, I'm going to do it properly, which is probably about 15 years ago. It does take a little bit of a shift in how you think about food and how you prepare food. But once you've got a few recipes and you understand how to use these wonderful ingredients, as you said, you can add them to anything.
Yeah.
So
And
that,
sometimes the healthy eating, all we have to do is just be a little bit more prepared.
yes, exactly.
So if we can do a little bit of planning and preparedness,
Yeah,
even to have quick, easy snack foods on hand,
yeah,
it just simplifies everything. And if you can take that overwhelm of, oh, well, I don't know how to do all of this, you just, and what I always say to my clients is you just start with one thing. Don't
exactly.
all of a
Love
sudden,
that.
like everything that we're doing today, don't go, yeah, I'm going to implement absolutely everything. I'm going to
Yeah,
do it all. But just start with one. Once you get that into a routine or a habit,
yeah,
you no longer have to think about it. It doesn't take up a lot of brain space. You just do it naturally.
yeah.
Then you can add something else or do something else. And that's the same way with adding new foods if you're not used to eating them into your diet as well. I think it's just that slowly, slowly.
Yeah.
And it also transitions people if they're not used to it as well.
No, and that's something that I'll no doubt share. Well, actually, I'll share it now because it's come to mind when you said don't try and do everything at once. I remember at university in our training as dietitians, we used to have a week trialing all of the therapeutic diets, including the vegetarian diet. So my girlfriend and I, we shared a unit on college together, and we just went right for these lentils and legumes. And of course, we knew very little about preparing them. And yes, we soaked them and yes, we cooked them. But we had the bloated tummies and we had, the extra flatulence. It wasn't uncomfortable, but our poor gut bacteria just hadn't had time to adapt. And so I know we're going to be touching on that, but just when it came to mind, I thought, look, if you're saying, "Oh, I've tried them before and that's what happened to me,"
Can't do
trust
it.
me, it doesn't stay that way and it doesn't have to be that way. And I know we're going to come back to that. So let's dive into the health benefits of pulses and perhaps just talk a little bit about what we're talking about, the sorts of ingredients when we talk about pulses, because it's lentils and legumes as well.
Yeah, the edible seeds of legumes. So we're talking lentils, beans, peas, chickpeas, things like that. And they've been a staple around the world for forever, right? So it's not new and it's tried and tested, but they're really high dense nutrients in them, right? You've got your protein, you've got your fiber, essential minerals like iron, magnesium, and zinc are in. And for me, because I focus on gut health, the fiber is really, really important because
Yeah.
we just don't eat enough fiber. We eat a lot of refined foods and processed foods. And the fiber is what our gut health, our microbiome. So if we're talking about gut health, we're talking about all those good little microbes in our gut. Not only do they help with digesting the rest of our food, but they also help to absorb the nutrients of the other food. So if you're eating pulses and foods with high fibers, you're feeding those gut microbes, your gut microbe gets healthy, and then you're even getting more nutrients out of the things, not only the pulses, but all of everything else that goes with it. So I think that that's really important. And I think it helps that way. What else have we got? We've got blood pressure or blood sugar levels, helping with controlling blood sugar levels because they're a slow digesting carbohydrate, which, we love we don't want those fluctuations that we often have in our blood sugars. And what else can I say that I think? Oh, about them being gluten-free. Lots of people are gluten sensitive. There's lots of ways that you can use pulses to help supplement and add into a gluten-free diet.
Yeah. And I think it's really important. I've seen with my clients, especially those who are pre-diabetes or already have diabetes, just getting those extra fibers in with the beans is just so important. And I think when we talk about the absorption of sugar as well, it's not just the individual foods, it's that whole meal combination. So if we're even just sneaking them in, we're still getting the benefits of that fiber to help slow down that glucose absorption. And the other one that I've seen quite helpful for as well is blood cholesterol levels as well. Again, the types of fibers and whole digestion, metabolism of fats, well, we can help with cholesterol levels as well. So that's, really great. And the last one that I want to come back to is the iron, because I know women, especially through the menstruating years, struggling with iron levels can be a real problem. And that certainly was the case for me as well. And at various times when I had been vegetarian, I'd always say to myself, oh, well, if my iron levels are still too low and, if I was feeling a bit tired, I'll give up. But then I would just tweak something with what I was doing. And again, that's the lovely story about nutrients in food. It's just not the one food, as I was saying before, it's that synergy of foods. So making sure we're having the vitamin C from our vegetables or fruits with the meal to help the absorption. But the big thing, Candace, I used to get caught out with was having my cups of tea and coffee too close to meal times. And of course, to me, that was the biggest change, in terms of improving the absorption of iron, was just to really be careful to keep a couple of hours between a coffee or a black tea. So yeah.
And especially I do like your breakfast, right? So they talk about fortifying cereals with iron and different things like that. Or
Yeah.
and I believe in trying to eat as much whole foods as we can to get all of our nutrients.
Yes.
But so I often will have, I love, it's an odd breakfast, but I love like miso soup for breakfast with with some greens and stuff in it. And I had to do the same thing, as go away from having my cup of coffee with my, even if you're having some eggs and some spinach, or you're doing whatever you're doing and you're going, well, I'm doing the right thing, but you're having it.
Yeah.
And it's not really good to have our coffees really early anyway. So
No.
it's sort of like your breakfast time,
No,
it's your
that's right.
cortisol levels and everything else. So,
Yep.
have your
That's right.
breakfast, wait a
Yep.
couple hours, have your
Yep.
coffee.
Yeah. Oh, and there's so much too about allowing the body to wake up with its natural process rather than adding in this turbo boost of caffeine in the morning. And I often think how marvelous the body is, because really eating mindfully and eating nutritionally, as you said, it makes sense. If you're going to have a coffee, probably around 10 or 11 is the best time to have it, not like at 6 o'clock in the morning or with your breakfast at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. So I think, yeah, it's really interesting how we work. And I know you're the same, the combination of looking at ancient wisdom, for me, Eastern nutrition, as well as Western science, you start to get that bigger picture of how things work. Anyway, I knew we'd get sidetracked, but how can we not? Because pulses kind of are that food that do need to be, as you said, prepared with care, but also eaten with care. So we do get the maximum nutrition benefits from it. So I mentioned before about my first experience of eating pulses with the bloating and the flatulence. How do we go about preparing, pulses to, decrease this, sort of side effect, I suppose, of all those extra fibers we get?
Yeah, so one of the first things we want to make sure that we're doing is that we're soaking everything, or soaking our grains. It would be great if you can soak them overnight. So if you can be prepared to actually, so you're just soaking them overnight and then straining it off to use them. And what that does is it starts to break down the outer shelling, and it's starting to get some of the nutrients more available. So if we look at even seeds, right? We talk about it same with soaking seeds and grains as well. So it works in the same way. We're trying to sprout, in the sense where we're starting that sprouting process of a seed. So we're soaking it, it's pretending it's underground and it's getting its water. And then when it actually, the next step would be to sprout it, if we could do some sprouting. And what that does is it further increases the digestibility of the food. So when we have a plant, to simplify it, I guess, is it's got protective mechanisms around the seeds so that the seeds don't get eaten, or that they can withstand until they are ready to actually sprout and grow into a plant.
Yeah.
And then we eat a seed that hasn't been sprouted, or what we're talking today about our pulses, if those nutrients are really trapped in there. So by sprouting it, it's actually opening it up and helping to release it and be more digestible.
Yeah. So just to clarify that, Candace, we talk about soaking overnight and then we talk about sprouting. So what's the difference or the additional process, I suppose, from soaking to actually getting to that sprout stage?
So when you're soaking, you're just soaking it in water, you would strain it all out.
Yeah.
And then you could just cook the food from there. So that would be your sort of your first step.
Yep.
Then if you wanted to sprout it, you would leave it without the water on it, but you want to make sure that it's not sitting in resting water. And then you can leave it until it starts to sprout. You'll start to see cracks in the shell. You'll start to see it starting to come alive.
Yes.
And then you're at that stage. It doesn't mean it needs to get to like a wheatgrass stage. You're not growing your bean shoots and your broccoli sprouts and your wheatgrass sprouts. You're just actually trying to see that it's starting to come alive.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you would just cook it as normal.
Yeah. So would you do that with your chickpeas, for example, or do you?
Yeah, you can. And I'll be honest, one we haven't talked about yet is I actually ferment before more than sprout, but that's just because I'm a fermentation geek. So, so the fermentation part of it then would be is you can ferment things two ways. So you can ferment them before you cook them.
Yes.
It's going to change the flavor of them. It's going to unlock even more digestibility, and then you can cook them. And most of them are done that way because that's what you're doing in your cooking in your meals. Or you can cook them and then ferment them afterwards. And by fermenting them, I mean you're adding a starter culture of some kind. So you're adding some whey from some yogurt or some kefir, or you are adding a bit of sauerkraut brine or brine from a previous ferment. You can get starter cultures as well. And so when you're doing that, you're adding probiotics and you're having the good food. But once you've cooked it, you're getting rid of the probiotics, but you still have the digestibility.
Yes, yes. So you were mentioning you do fermented hummus. So explain that process to me, because I have to say I haven't heard of fermented hummus. So I'm really interested in this.
Yeah, so fermented hummus is really easy. So you would soak and you would cook your chickpeas as normal. So you use from a base of cooked chickpeas.
Yes.
Then what you do is you put the chickpeas, so you can do it two ways as well. You put the chickpeas in what's called a saltwater brine. So, and I'm going to give a little guide to all the listeners so that we've got some examples of how to do all of this. But you put the chickpeas into some salt water with a 2% salt per solution. Now, you don't need to have a starter culture, and you could just call it wild fermenting. But if you have a starter culture, what you'd use is then you'd use a couple of, say you were doing a cup, you would use like a couple of tablespoons of some whey or some salt, and you leave it on your bench in that water, in that briny water, again, for another 24 to 48 hours, depending on how warm it is. You'll start to see bubbles and things like that. And you strain it off and you make hummus just as normal as if they were regular chickpeas. You've now got even more digestible chickpeas, and you've got all the probiotics in there.
Yes. Yeah. So what you're sharing with us, and I think, some listeners might be saying, oh, all these steps, but they're all simple steps. As you mentioned earlier, it's about being prepared and planning to have these foods, because a lot of these foods, once we've cooked them, they can be used in batch cooking as well, can't they?
So you could make a batch of, so say we're talking about chickpeas, you could make a batch of chickpeas at the beginning or the end, on the Sunday or the beginning of the week. And then you can use those and you could just add them into a quick stir fry. You could add them into a salad, sprinkle them on a salad. You could roast them to make like a snack, like a little roasted snack. You could make fermented hummus. So, or you could make plain hummus. So by cooking the one, so you might soak it one big batch one night, and then you're basically started, and that's it for the week.
That's right.
Yeah. So it makes it quite easy to do it in that bulk. And that's just, it is being prepared. But then if you ferment your food as well, it lasts longer in the fridge.
Yes.
So you can have fermented hummus in your fridge for a couple of weeks.
Yes, yes. And that's the thing that I often find about making my own hummus is, what do you do it? I've even experimented with freezing it and doing all sorts of things just to see how it lasts. But I'm certainly going to be giving this fermented hummus a go. I'm intrigued, I have to say, Candace. So
And
thanks for,
one other thing that you can do is if you've got some hummus and you've got a starter culture or some brine and it's already made up with it's already all been blended and made
yeah,
up, you can actually add the starter culture to it, leave it
yes.
out on your bench for I'd say 8 to 10 hours, and then
Yeah.
pop it in your fridge.
Wow.
So there's ways of doing it after the fact if you forget or if you don't know, or yeah, so lots of different ways of doing it.
Yeah, no, that's a great trick because I think hummus is a wonderful thing. I add it to all sorts of things and it just adds that extra protein, it adds extra flavor and interest, even to steamed vegetables. One of my favorite things is sprinkling some sunflower seeds or pepitas with some hummus over steamed broccoli. I just love that. It's a simple thing to do. So thanks for sharing that tip. When it comes to any other myths or barriers about pulses in your cooking classes or working with your clients, is there any other things that come up other than what we've spoken about so far?
Well, what we did say that they were only for vegetarians, right? Like that nobody other
Okay,
than
so it's that
vegetarians.
mindset, yeah.
Yeah, it is a mindset. Like, oh, well, I don't even go down that aisle to the supermarket. I don't know what any of that is because I'm not vegetarian. So
Yes.
definitely that. So, we're in a phase of the world at the moment where the price of food is really expensive. So not only adding or cutting your meals with adding more pulses in, does it add the fiber and the nutrient density into your meals, but it also stretches the meals. It goes a lot further from doing it that way. And it's an economical, it's a sustainable way. We'll
Yes.
talk about that, I'm sure, but that's
Yes.
one thing. One of the other myths is that they're boring and that they're tasteless because they are that starchy, plain tasting
Yeah.
food. So if you have eating them on their own, yeah, you might think that way. But the best thing you do is you add all the seasonings. They soak up seasonings. So any kind of spices or herbs, adding those in, and cooking them with it and then making things with it. Just you're adding, when we spoke about culinary and medicinal herbs, you're adding herbs for flavor, but you're also adding nutrients.
That's right.
You're adding lots of things. If you add turmeric to things, it tastes great, but you're also getting
That's right.
anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you're adding ginger, you're getting anti-inflammatory, and you're also getting digestibility. So there's lots of things that you can
Yeah.
add in. So definitely people say, oh, I don't eat that stuff. It's tasteless. It,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
One
think
other thing.
this is where looking at how traditionally these foods have been eaten. I just love traveling in Nepal and India because I know I'm going to eat some amazing food, a vegetarian food, being a vegetarian eater. And, but the other food that I think we think about or some people forget about is falafel. We often forget that falafel is made from pulses as well, whether it be chickpeas, lentils, or especially in Egypt, they like using the broad bean and they call their falafel tamaya. And they're just wonderful foods. And it's interesting again looking at the synergy of food. And people think, oh, well, I wouldn't eat falafel because they're deep fried. But they're served with all these wonderful fresh salads. So it's kind of like it all balances out because what you're eating them with, maybe unlike in Western culture where you have a hamburger with fries, you're not doing that with falafel. You're just having it with wonderful fresh salads.
And you can prepare them a little bit different, right? You can cook them in better oils if you're cooking them at
Yes.
home.
Yes.
And you can even, doesn't work quite as well, but you can oven bake or just
Yes.
like a pan fry, right?
I've tried that too, where I've pan fried and then put them in the oven, but I have to say I prefer the deep fried.
Me too. Me too. Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Yeah, and it's the same as we're sneaking these things in. I love Mexican food,
yes.
and I put so many different types of beans and everything into any kind of of Mexican dish. So if you were to look at my like a taco mince or something like that, there is actually more vegetables in that than there is meat. And it's just an easy way to continue to have those, and you have all of those flavors and those
Yep.
seasonings in.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think let's talk about this idea that pulses are the food of the future. We've talked
Mhm.
about it from an economical point of view, but also I think from an environmental point of view, it's definitely worth giving these foods a shout out as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess when we think about it, we're talking about the eco-friendliness of pulses. So there's less water used to grow crops of pulses than there is from animal protein.
Yes.
So that's a big concern, I guess, around the world, and we're talking about that a lot. And I think the affordability and the accessibility of pulses is so important, right? Like it's as we said, it is something that is very cost-effective way to fill out your meals with really nutrient dense
Yes.
foods.
Yeah.
So
So
those are the two big things that I think of.
yeah, and if someone's listening now saying, yeah, I'd really like to give this a go, and they're just not quite sure how the family's going to take this, what's your biggest tip? I know we've talked about sneaking them in, but I know for myself, like you gave a great example in terms of your taco mince, being more vegetable based is one way. I know with I call it a lentil bolognese rather than a spaghetti bolognese. So it could be all lentils or 50-50 or any combination. Any other tips for people wanting to give this a try?
Yeah, so definitely start with foods that you already enjoy. So take a look at the foods that you already like. So if you've never eaten, Indian food, don't just all of a sudden go to straight Indian food, because
Yeah.
your body, your mind and your body is just gonna kind of go, what are you doing? It's not normal. And your family potentially is gonna go, what's going on? But if you start with the foods that you already enjoy and then look at how you can add them into that. So like we said, if you have a salad, adding some chickpeas into a salad. If you don't like hummus and you don't like chickpeas, you can actually make like a white bean dip instead, or a black bean dips, things like that, different ways of doing it that way. The other, I guess, tip I would say is look at the different ways that you can cook, or use different cooking methods. So look at roasting them. Look at having them as a puree, as in a dip or in a dressing, whole, as we talked about in different things, or half and half, and then things like sprouting and fermenting as well. Because the cooking method's going to change the texture and it's going to change the flavor, and it's just gives you a bit of variety.
Yes. Yeah. And I think what we mentioned before as well, because these foods don't have a lot of flavour on their own, looking at those meals that you cook that do have the flavourings there, because these are wonderful foods because they absorb whatever flavour you give them. So
100%.
they're just going to add to that enjoyment of the meal with the flavour and the different textures as well. And I think, interestingly, from a mindful eating perspective, when I've run mindful eating workshops, the things that people love most about their favorite foods is actually the texture. It just surprises me, the times I have done this particular workshop and it comes up texture all the time. So experimenting not only with legumes, but all of our foods in terms of how we prepare them and find the textures that we enjoy as well.
Yeah, and it's playing with it. And if you try it once, not going, I give up.
No, that's right. Yeah.
It's just it adds a lot of variety as well. We can do a lot of different things with them, which
Yes.
just helps encourage healthy eating.
That's right. And they pair so well with vegetables as well. And that's something we want people to eat more of too. So it's kind of like a win-win overall in terms of getting that variety and the nutrients that we need. Candace, it's been lovely sharing with you, and I feel that we could have kept going on and on this topic. So certainly we'll give some thought to how we can encourage people more to experiment perhaps with fermentation, but also keep using vegetables and lentils and legumes. If there were just 3 takeaways or main messages about eating more pulses, just kind of summarize what we've been talking about, what would they be?
I would say so adding more nutrient dense food, high density nutrient dense food to whatever it is that you're eating is just so important for our overall health and well-being. It would be making sure that you're starting slow, cooking well. So looking at how you're cooking it, making sure you're cooking it really well, so that you don't have any digestion or digestibility issues with it, and just really having fun and playing with it, adding flavors, and just really enjoying being able to add these different foods into your diet every day.
Yeah, no, thanks again, Candace. And where can people find out more about what you do? And also, I think you mentioned you had a bit of a guide or a tips and tricks sheet available as well.
Yeah, so I'm on social media, or if you Google just a Wild Health Hub is probably the easiest way of doing it, on Instagram or Facebook. I've got a link tree as well, which has all the classes that I do and just guides and booklets and things like that. And I will pop this up in there, and it's just a little guidebook, gives a little bit of information about what we talked about today. A bit on fermentation and some recipes for fermented and non-fermented pulses and legumes, and adding them into your diet.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll make sure your links to social media are actually included with the notes from this episode. So, yeah, people can still Google, but we'll also provide the links for them as well. So thanks again, Candace. It's been wonderful, and I look forward to having some more conversations with you to encourage us all to eat mindfully and really nourish ourselves well. And being prepared and having the confidence with food is one of the 9 eating for you drivers for eating. It's about that food knowledge and skills, and putting that into practice. And it fits really nicely with another driver, convenience. So it's making these foods that nourish us convenient as well. So thanks again.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
So if you've been listening today and you've enjoyed this episode, please let us know why, so we can provide more of this content for you. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. I look forward to sharing with you again next week. You have been listening to the Eating for You podcast with Sallyanne Pisk. If you are looking for additional support to enjoy a lifelong way of healthier eating, then join me in a free 30-minute call to see if our approach is right for you. I have included the link to book an obligation-free call in this episode's notes.